What's up guys, Lou here for Golf Avenue, and we're back with another comparison test for you at home. This time, we're ditching the drivers. Instead, we're gonna look at iron sets. More specifically, we're gonna look at 6 of TaylorMade's latest iron sets dating back to 2011. And as always with this test, we're looking to compare the performance of a brand new model against the performance of models from years past, and obviously one model that is way older than any other. Ultimately, at the end of this test, we want to see just how much that brand new iron set is really worth in terms of not only money, but the amount of performance that you'll get out of it. And we'll also compare it against a model from 2011, like we said, just to see how well it performs and just to see how much you could save by turning to that older model. And if you did turn to that older model, how much of an impact will that have on your performance on the course? But enough with the chatting, let's check out what clubs we'll be testing in today's video. The first generations of irons we'll be looking at are the TaylorMade QI irons released in 2024. These irons should be packed with the latest and forgiving and performance enhancing technology to create the best game improvement irons possible. Did that help me out with my test? Well, there's only one way to see, and we'll be looking at that shortly with the results, but first, let's check out the rest of our clubs. Next up, we're going back one more generation with the TaylorMade Stealth released in 2022. These irons are very similar to the QI, but will the performance be the same? Again, only one way to find out, but I'm very interested to see how they perform on our screen. With our third set, we're only going back one single year to 2021 with the TaylorMade Sim 2 Max. It was TaylorMade's first foray in the cab back style of cavity back irons, so I'm really interested to see how this one performs, how this feels in my hands compared to more traditional cavity back irons. Next up, we're looking at the predecessor of the Sim 2 Max with the Sim Max released in 2020. This one has a more of a traditional cavity back profile, with the exception of this one single strand of metal that connects the top of the club head to the lower part of it, making for a stronger club head at impact. Our fifth iron set is the TaylorMade M6 released in 2019. They are the successor to the M4, another set that we would have loved to include, but unfortunately we didn't have them with the steel shaft and the regular flex at the time of recording, so we went the M6 instead. Much like the Sim Max, the M6 has this metal connection between the top of the club head and the bottom part of it to create a more powerful club head impact, and also a sturdier one that will produce longer strikes. But there's only one way to find out, and that is to test the club. So we'll have to do that in a second. Let's just look at our last set. Last but not least, we've got the TaylorMade R11 released in 2011. They are really more of a typical cavity back iron set with the exposed back of the club head here. We also have a nice little red insert right at the bottom at the back of the club head. This is designed to help enhance your launch condition and impact. In other words, it's designed to help launch the ball higher and provide you with more spin in the air. How will that translate on the course? Well, there's only one way to find out, and we'll be looking at those results shortly. But first, let's head to the office and test all of our clubs. Just before I get going, I just want to remind you guys that we'll come back right behind this desk with the results to take a closer look at the performance, and we'll finally decide if those older clubs can match up to the performance of brand new ones, and if you're better off saving and spending less money on older models than spending your full paycheck on a brand new set of irons. Let's get to it and see what results we can get. Alright guys, we're back at the FC behind our desk to take a closer look at the performance of our irons. First up, we're going to look at this year's release, the TaylorMade QI. Right upon taking the QI in my hands, I knew right away that this set was going to be special. It's not your typical game improvement iron set. While it does look like your typical game improvement iron set, it's nothing like it. Actually, it's something which I've personally never seen before. So let's first talk about distance. There's no denying it, the QI are long and strong. I didn't need to produce the highest amount of swing speed to get decent result with those irons. They would just fly right away, and a testament to that was the fact that they were the longest of all the irons we tested in almost all of the categories. Actually, it was the longest 7 and pitching wedge. But the QI is so much more than just distance. Actually, the spin rates from these irons were outstanding to me, and really what surprised me the most with these ones. Actually, they were the highest spinning sets we tested, aside from a few exceptions. That being said, there's no denying that the QI irons will fit the game of any beginner or casual golfer that is in search of a little more distance or forgiveness off the tee. The one knock I will give to them though, and it's not that big of a deal, but it's pretty noticeable, is that it has a very strong draw bias that is obvious from the offset look at the dress. Draw bias shouldn't be too much of an issue if you're dealing with a slice. Actually, it'll be a saving grace for you. But if you're like me and you tend to draw the ball already naturally, then dealing with an offset like this one might become an issue over time, and you might feel like you're fighting against this draw bias all the time. So aside from that, the QI irons are certainly a great set of irons for beginners, but you also have to consider the price of them. They are a brand new model released from this year. You can find some used iron sets for a very great price, but nevertheless, you'll still have to spend 3 times or maybe 4 times what you can pay for some of the other sets in this list. And for that reason, we're going to look at those performances as well and let you know which one is the best for your budget. Let's get to it. Second in our list are the TaylorMade Stealth. Basically, they are very, very similar to the QI, especially when it comes to technological purse. The main difference that you'll notice between the two is when it comes to the size of the club heads. The QI irons have slightly larger club heads, which also in turn provide slightly larger sweet spots. Yes, this makes a difference in terms of performance and forgiveness, but the price difference between the two may be not good enough to justify spending more money on the QI and getting a slightly larger sweet spot over the Stealth. Despite their similarities, there are a few things that will jump out to a keen eye, especially if you're looking at the Stealth's performance. Right away, distance data points are not as good as they are with the QI, but this can easily be explained by the fact that my club speed were not as good with the Stealth as they were with the QI. What I will say for the Stealth, and is a great quality to have, is that the transfer of energy was just as good as it was with the QI10. Yes, I did not swing the club as hard as I did with the QI10, but the proportion of ball speed versus club speed was just as good as it was with the QI10 when I hit the Stealth. All this to say that the differences between the QI irons and the Stealth are basically non-existent. Despite these massive similarities, there are some small discrepancies between the two, and I will point them out for you right now. First up, the draw bias with the Stealth is not as important as it was with the QI, simply because of the fact that the offset is not as great with the Stealth. Yes, there's still a slight draw that you'll notice when you're hitting the Stealth, but you won't need to fight it nearly as much as you had to with the QI. The other main thing, and that's pretty obvious to everyone, is that the Stealth, although they're very similar to the QI, were released beforehand. In other words, they are cheaper and more affordable to you. You can certainly find a lot of Stealth used sets on thegolfavenue.com right now if you head on over. We have them in various flexes, various materials for the shaft, and various lineups of clubs in your set. So make sure to head on over and find yours today. But if for some reason you don't feel like this one is right for you, or you need something that's a little more affordable, well, lucky for you, we've got 4 more sets coming up. So let's head on over to our next set, the Sim 2 Max. Moving away from the Stealth and going back 1 year to the Sim 2 Maxes, which were released in 2021, you have right away a very similar look to both the QI and the Stealth iron, in the sense that the Sim 2 Max has the cap back technology, which covers the back of the club head. Normally, Cavi back in game improvement irons, you will have an open concept back of the club head that will allow golfers to peek through and see what it looks like. But in the case of the Sim 2 Max, TaylorMade is exploring with a new technology. The idea of putting the cap back on the club head should help strengthen the club head overall, giving you more forgiveness and more power and impact. But what I noticed during my test is that TaylorMade only delivered on one of those 2 fronts. And what I mean by that is that the Sim 2 Max irons did not provide me with the longest distance of all the clubs I tested out. Actually, it ranks right in the middle of the pack when it comes to distance, so it wasn't really the most impressive set, but it was also not the most disappointing one. But there's a clear explanation as to why the Sim 2 Max probably didn't travel as far as some of the other clubs that we looked at. And that simple reason is spin rates. If you look at the spin rates of the Sim 2 Max, you'll notice that they are slightly above all of the other clubs that we tested, except for a few exceptions, obviously. And this extra spin is probably, or most likely, the reason why those clubs didn't travel as far. Basically, what happens with the Sim 2 Max is that the ball is launched really high in the air, and the extra spin helps keep it up there and even raise the height of your ball trajectory, which in turn, when your ball lands on the green or on the ground, it won't travel as far, it won't roll as far as some of the other clubs that we tested. Take for example, the 5 irons that we tested, they all have way lower spin rates because the ball is not launching as high and they're not spinning as much in the air just because they are meant to travel for longer distances. However, the fact that Sim 2 Max has more spin also indicates that it's likely the most accurate set of all the ones we tried out today. This extra spin will help you hit more accurate approach shots, which are really crucial for beginner golfers who are learning how to hit the green or how to get on the green. And if you're looking to lower your score as fast as possible, well, your best bet is to get the ball on the green and then go for a 2-putt, which is always a safe play. In the case of the Sim 2 Max irons, they should help you produce these exact results time and time again as long as you trust them on the course. But now, let's move on to our next set. Now looking at our fourth set, the TaylorMade Sim Max release in 2020. These irons were puzzling, to say the least. And what I mean by that is that they managed to produce some of the longest strikes I hit with some irons, especially the 5-iron, and I was really accurate in terms of shot dispersion with this set. But the one thing that really stood out to me is the low spin rates that these irons were producing. Usually speaking, personally, I would go for something that has low spin rates, but for my driver or for my fairway wood, which I want to launch high in the air and have as little spin on it as possible so that it travels as much as possible. What happens with those irons, and the 5-iron is the best one to illustrate what I'm talking about, is that the low spin rates makes for a decent carry number, which most of these irons in today's test had very similar data when it comes to carry distance, but it's the total distance where the Sim Max really shines. And the reason for that is that when the ball hits the ground with low spin rates, it's more likely to roll on and go for longer, which again is nice with your driver, but you want to avoid that when it comes to your irons. You want them to hit the ground and plant as fast as possible so that your approach shot can be accurate as possible. So all this to say, the Sim Max irons provided me with the performance that I was expecting out of a game improvement irons, in the sense that they had plenty of forgiveness and were very long. However, my gripe with it is that the spin rates are so low that unless you really naturally launch the ball very high, much like I do, lucky for me, you'll really have a hard time hitting greens or targets with these irons, because you'll need to produce so much height out of your shots to compensate for the low spin rates that you might be losing out on some distance in the long run just because you're focused on hitting the ball upwards instead of forward. So just something to keep in mind. Yes, the Sim 2 Max are very affordable. Yes, they are great for beginners, but if you can't launch the ball very high naturally, you might want to look at another option. But lucky for you, we've got 2 more options coming up on top of the ones that we looked at already, and maybe one of those 2 coming up is the right one for you. Moving on to our 5th set, we've got the TaylorMade M6 released in 2019. Here again, as I mentioned earlier, we have this setup with the metal rod at the back that's supposed to strengthen the club face and make for a really nice launch pad with the club face of your iron. What I'll say is that TaylorMade again kind of missed the mark with this one. They're not the power tool that they claim to be, or that I wish them to be. In fact, for the M6, most of the distance data points, except for the pitching wedge, were ranking in the lower half of all the clubs I tested out today. So it's really a testament of the fact that the ball doesn't really quite explode as much off the club face when it comes to the M6. However, they have some nice redeeming qualities that we can't overlook, especially if you're a beginner golfer on a tight budget. First of all, my shot dispersion, especially the landing area with the M6, was the best by far of all the clubs I tested. The 5-iron was a bit more spread out, but the 7-iron and the pitching wedge had very tight dispersions, which made for a very encouraging and accurate club in my opinion. Keep in mind that while you may not be as long as you wish with your iron, as long as you're able to be as accurate as possible, well then there's half the battle won right there for you, just by being more accurate than the norm. The other thing to point out when it comes to the M6, and it's probably the reason why I was able to be so accurate, is that the draw bias when it comes to these one is not as important as the other clubs in today's list. Actually, it was so subdued in fact that I was able to hit very natural, straighter strikes that were slightly drawing, much like my natural ball flight trajectory would do. Of course, this doesn't help you at all if you tend to push or slice the ball with your irons, but for golfers like me who tend to draw the ball naturally, this is really important to take into consideration, especially if you're looking to move on to these irons. And finally, they did produce some very impressive spin rates except for the pitching wedge, which should be considerable for any beginner golfer. Combine all of these nice attributes that should appeal to beginner and casual golfers with a low price point, and you should have a winning formula for any beginner golfer. Last but not least, we've got our old model, the 2011 release R11. I was really excited to try those out and see how well they could match up to the QI, and what I've got to say is that I was not disappointed at all. Obviously, I was not expecting them to match the distance, and the reason why that is It's because the loft angle for the QI are much stronger than they are for the R11. Take the pitching wedge, for example. The R11 pitching wedge has a 45-degree of loft angle. In the case of the QI, we have a pitching wedge at around 43 degrees. This is not a massive discrepancy when it comes to 2 degrees, but in the long run, especially if you look at 5-iron or 7-irons, where the discrepancy is more like 3 degrees or 4 degrees, then you're starting to see some pretty interesting differences that become compounded by the fact that you're swinging the club harder with your longer irons. That being said, and considering the fact that I knew the R11s were never going to be as long as the QI, I was still very much impressed by them. They still hold their own, they're still very forgiving, and the feeling that you have when you're standing over them in a dress is one of the better ones I've had all day when I was testing those clubs. The other factor that can explain the shorter distances for the R11 has to be the high spin rates. As I alluded to when I presented those at the start of the video, we have the adjustable weight at the back of the club head that will play a key role when it comes to spin and launch angle. And it certainly did, because the R11 was by far the highest spinning of all the clubs I hit overall. And deliver it did, because of all the clubs I tested, the R11 were by far the highest spinning ones overall. They were very impressive, and I do feel that they'd probably be the most accurate ones if I was to take them out in the course. So despite the shorter distance data from the R11, this set really has me wondering why a beginner or casual golfer would ever spend the money that is required to buy the QI irons. The data that I've provided shows that the R11 is able to hang around. Yes, the distance is not as long, but I covered that already, and I explained why it's not as long. If you're willing to give up just that extra bit of distance, but you want to stick to your budget, well, there's no denying it. The R11 are an excellent choice, and any golf clubs from 10 years or even 15 years ago can certainly match the performance of more recent models. Do I know for certainty that the forgiveness in the R11 is as good as the QI? Probably not. I'd have to take them out more and play more rounds with them to let you know over time. But what I can say for a fact is that they are still pretty forgiving for older models, and they're still cavity back irons, which are ideal for someone who's looking for a game improvement model. To wrap it up with the R11, obviously I wouldn't blame anybody who turns to the QI, especially if you can't afford it. But for most casual golfers or beginners who need to deal with a specific budget when they're first starting out or trying to build or upgrade their clubs, well, the R11 are an excellent option, much like any other club from 10 to 15 years ago. So wrapping things up and looking at the overall results from our test, there's no denying it, and we have to give credit where credit is due. TaylorMade has produced one of the best iron sets I've ever tested in my life with the QI irons. They're forgiving, they're long, and they spin. Everything you'd want from an iron set, especially if you're a beginner or casual golfer. However, the only caveat, and it's a pretty big one, let's be obvious, is the price. At such a price tag, it's normal that most golfers won't even consider adding the QI to their set. And to those golfers, we say, well, look at the results from our other sets and find the one that suits your budget. Because as we saw, older models, while they may be not as long, or maybe not as spinny, or maybe not as forgiving, they are pretty damn close in terms of performance overall, and they will provide you with very acceptable and very reasonable performance for a cost that is much more affordable. By the way, if you want to take a closer look at the full results that we got from this test, make sure to check out the blog. It's posted in the description below. But going back to our irons, of course, if your budget is tighter, look at the different options we posted for you, look at their stats, and find which one is best suited to your needs and your budget. They're all great game improvement irons. TaylorMade has been known to make some. Just need to find the one that's right for you. Of course, if you need help to do that, you can always get in touch with our team of experts. They'll be happy to help you out and answer all the questions that you may have for them. And before I let you go, I just want to leave you with one parting thought. Keep in mind that the most expensive club is not always the best club. You can get great performance out of models that are half the price, even a third of the price. Just keep in mind that iron sets have certain profiles, and that you should be looking for profiles that are best suited to your skill set. Just keep that in mind, and you should be good to go. And for Golf Avenue, I've been Lou. Until next time, see ya.